This is Synchronicity.
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 Welcome to episode 6 of Synchronicity. Today's guest is David Silver from Mindrolling podcast and also one of the co-founders of MindPod Network, as am I. So there you go. So we're doing a little cross-pollination here. David also happens to be one of my best friends. I think he's like one of my newest best friends too, because you don't get best. You can be friends with a lot of people, clearly. But, best friend, someone who, I will say this is the mark of a best friend to me. If you can talk on the telephone for more than an hour, then that's someone who is your best friend. Doesn't matter who it is, unless it's customer service people, then they're your sworn enemies. But, people you actually know, that's the true mark of a best friend. And David is of a very select group, small group of people I can do that with, because generally I hate the telephone. I don't like holding up to my ear, so usually I'm on speakerphone, and I don't like the telephone. It bothers me. Texting, slightly better, but also getting into not so great zone. Whatever the next thing is, we'll see if that's good. But yeah, David is awesome. I say everyone's awesome. I think my wife pointed out to me, you're so general. You use these generalities, awesome. I have limited vocabulary at times, but David is brilliant, insightful, smart, kind, compassionate, cool, and also tells some of the best stories. Also literally knows everyone. There's 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, there's 100%, it's like 4 degrees of David Silver. Knows everyone, literally. And we talk about a lot of things in this podcast, sports among them. And it's funny, when this was recorded, I think the football Giants, had just lost to the Eagles at the time, but still applicable to this week because the Giants just lost to the Redskins. And I am not making fun of that because I'm a Dolphins fan, and the Dolphins have ripped my heart out for 2 decades now, I'm proud to say. So yeah, I'm not making fun of the Giants. I actually like the Giants. They beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl, and when the Patriots are about to go undefeated and ruin their dreams, which made me very happy. So you can see sports, you'll hear me mention, I say it's my sadhana. It's a spiritual practice for me, and it really is, because I have had to notice quite some not so great behavior in myself over the years, which is well documented by some of my friends back in the day. But what I like about sports is it allows you to, we put our faith in these teams that we choose to like. Some people like it based on where they grew up. Some people are like me. They looked and just watched and fell in love with the player. Dan Marino for me, best quarterback ever. I don't care what anyone says. Listen, truthfully, for the however many people out there who understand what I'm saying about this, Dan Marino would have been so much better than all of these quarterbacks now. It's a different league now, passing different. Anyway, I digress. What I like about sports is you put your faith in these players and teams that you ultimately don't really have any direct control of. Not control of, but you can't dictate what's going to happen. And that to me is kind of a metaphor for life. We may like to go around and pretend like we know what's going to happen or have some control over circumstances, but if you've lived, you don't even have to live that long to know that's not really how things work. We can construct these realities that make it feel like we're controlling things, but in reality, that's not what's happening. There's quite a bit of uncertainty, even from the molecular level, there's uncertainty. So I like that sports kind of emulates that in a way, which, if you're into, no big deal. You don't have to like sports. If you're into sports and you're feeling weird because it seems like it's not like the most spiritual thing to do, or it's not, super holy, you're looking at it the wrong way. Anything can be spiritual. You can find spiritual stuff and meaning in the most mundane of things, and that's when you're really starting to get on the right path. So for me, sports is very spiritual. I remember, in fact, it's going on right now, the Open Your Heart and Paradise Retreat in Maui with Ram Dass and friends. Sharon Salzberg is there, Krishna Das, Jai Uttal. It's going on right now, and I wore my Ryan Tannehill, Ryan Tannehill. But I wore my Ryan Tannehill jersey the 2 times I went to the retreat, during the retreat. And, you know, some people I think maybe looked at it and was like, whoa, why is this guy wearing a sports jersey? But honestly, you know, you got to support the team. So I like sports. We also talk about a few other things. So we talk about news cycles too. He's super into the news. I'm getting more into the news, but I don't watch the news, but he watches the news, and we go into politics. And I think that's pretty pertinent, right now. Also, I wanted to, remind everyone to, leave a review and a rating on iTunes if you can and are able. I would like to read a review, that someone left. Here it is. This podcast has quickly become one of my regulars. Noah has a great sense of humor and some really amazing guests. Not only is Synchronicity relatable, it also forces you to think outside yourself. So this is great. Love this review. Thank you so much. So I go to look who it's by, and it says Noah 131313. And I'm like, man, that really looks like I just left like a really glowing review about my own podcast, like a jerk, like on my own podcast. Look at this is great. Noah is wonderful. So I pointed out to my wife and she's like, wait, that's my podcast. That was my review. So I found out that she left the review. She changed her name. So now it doesn't look like I'm just stroking my own ego. But seriously, if you like the podcast, the best thing you can do, don't need donations, don't need any money. If you want to give money, give it to MindPod Network. There's a donate button on mindpodnetwork.com. Use that. But if you could leave a review, if you like the podcast, that would be awesome. Or leave a comment on the podcast page, whatever you want to do. Somehow, some way, that's all I need. So yeah, that's today's podcast. David and me talk about a bunch of stuff. We always talk about a wide variety of topics. So I think you're going to like this. Again, David is one of my favorite people. This podcast easily could have been 10 hours, but we decided to not make it 10 hours. So without further ado, here's David Silver. First question to you is, you are one of my good friends, one of my best friends, and you're also a good example, if not the best example I know of someone who is what I would classify definitely in the real world, right? Like, you engage with a lot of things that many people engage with. You participate in popular culture, you participate in news cycles, maybe to your detriment, I don't know. But you're also, you know, right behind you, I can see all the pictures. I've been to your home many times. You're definitely on the spiritual path too. You have Anandamayi Ma, Ramakrishna all around you. So my first question is, and you have a, Mindrolling podcast where you go in and ask a lot of people from different sectors and walks of life how they got into the spiritual path. My question to you is, how do you kind of reconcile those two things? How have you done that throughout your life, and how do you continue to do that?
Boy, that is a really strong question to start with. Doesn't surprise me coming from you, Noah, but yeah, it's a really good question because it's a question I ask myself. It's not something that I've totally resolved. It's, it's sort of a mood thing. There are times when I absolutely cannot stand the world and don't want to, certainly don't want to switch on the TV and I'm not interested in any way, shape or form with the sort of ebb and flow of worldly news, music, anything. It's just no. Okay. Take me away from that. I don't want to know about it because it's distracting me from deeper inquiry. But over the years, I've met enough people who also were like this, who were terrifically deep people who really had gone deep into their own psyche to find a spiritual truth, who were also involved in the world. However, I must say that on the whole, my experience is that people do bifurcate that.
Yeah.
And I find it a little bit discouraging because we are in the world, we are incarnated for a specific reason. And, you can kind of be here now and find the present intensity and the one and all of that. At the same time, I tremendously enjoy certain things, and they relax me and make me less testy and less full of fear. Because for a moment, maybe I should be meditating, but instead I'm watching, the Champions League soccer tournament this week, and for the rest of the tournament this year. I watched the execrable display by the Giants last night against the Eagles.
Wow,
of all
what
teams.
a craptastic game. Oh, my God.
Yeah, really awful. And yet I got a lot out of it because I found myself just tuning down and letting it go. Now, I saw someone who I know recently, a woman, said, "How can anybody be interested in professional sports? Or, you're just sitting there like an idiot, and these guys getting paid millions, and you care?" And I couldn't really answer that question. All I could say was, I like it.
Yeah,
I like it. I like Keith Richards' new album. But then I draw the line, and this is sort of like the essence of the answer to you, Noah. I draw the line at stuff which is purely designed to manipulate us into a kind of somnambulism. Right. The news, television on the whole is somnambulistic. It puts you into a state which avoids major issues in your own life. You can go a whole life and never contemplate certain things because you've been obsessed with, and that's why the 60s. I mean, just to further move on this, the 60s were very special because pop culture started to, deepen and deviate into universal issues. So after the Beatles had done a few sort of, kind of faux three-part harmony American black women from Detroit group copies, You Really Got a Hold on Me, all those great songs, they started to do songs about spiritual reality. Right. And then, we saw the Dead and bands like that all over the world starting to talk about things and sing about things that were really very, very, very special and to sort of infiltrate our lives and make it so that we actually went towards those things where we might not have done. Right. And so that kind of brought the two things together in a way. And I think that still applies. You go and see a movie and it affects you deeply, right, and has a spiritual impact. So I'm always open to that. But there's a real distinction between that, which is sort of like deepening and widening and makes you more of a person within people, within everybody, so you can have a conversation with anybody, which I think is really important. Living in a bubble is something that I deplore. Whether it be living in the bubble of a cult or a spiritual discipline that just doesn't allow you to talk to people on the bus. Right. It's like people who drive around in limousines and private planes. They never meet anybody, and then they read the news to us, and they think they know what's happening. So that's a long answer, but
it's a great answer.
It's a complex question, though.
Well, it's a very complex question. I know that, and that's why I gave it to you right off the bat. Funnily enough, you touched on, I have a few questions jotted down, and I know a lot of this is going to be kind of freeform, but you touched on like almost all of them in that answer, which is awesome because it naturally leads to a lot. But one that I wanted to start with is, because you mentioned the news. You are one of the few people I still know who really actively is involved in the news cycles. Like we talk about this. You watch the cable news shows, and I know other people who do, but you are someone I've personally over time, and not to completely disengage, I still watch the debates and try to read articles about what's going on, but I cannot watch local news. I can't watch nightly news. I can't watch cable news because I find what you're talking about, it's kind of like a sedative, or it's like a red herring. It's like a distraction from either what's going on in your life, which is very important, or what is maybe what you can do about situations to make a change or help or things like that. So what is your relationship with like the cable news is? How do you weave that into the David story?
Well, that's another penetrating question. I might say to people who are listening that Noah and I have had multiple conversations over the last few years, and you don't get away with Noah with a trivial pursuit. It just doesn't exist on that level, and for that I'm eternally grateful. Because there've been some sterling exchanges,
Yeah.
and we usually agree about everything, but we do have exchanges. That's a really good question too. I think on the whole, it's a failing. I think that I'm trying to cut it down, and I know that my partner in life, Sandra, will, if she's here, because she's so busy, but when she's here and I'm watching something and it's some ridiculous nonsense about, I don't know, about Ben Carson or about something, she will say, could we just not watch this, please? It's just so meaningless. And I will stop.
Right.
So it's a bit of an addiction. However, there is sort of a kind of an interest on my part as to how the world is going. Most of my friends would say, well, David, that doesn't tell you how the world's going at all. Right. It's bleak. It's full of false dialectics. Yeah. It's full of all kinds of games that they play in order for ratings and all of that sort of superficial stuff. And I agree with all of that. So what I'm trying to do now is cut down, actually, and not watch it all. Because if you watch CNN long enough, you will end up in an institution.
Right? I mean, or if not, just like you medicating yourself in some serious way. I mean, because it's such a polarized, it's like the politics of actual politics has completely seeped into these news channels over the past X amount of years. And now it's just like, hey, divisive this, divisive that, be mad at this. Did you see this? Oh, here's some horrible shit that happened. And it's not to completely dismiss it. The media, I find so many articles and interviews that I've seen over the past years that have been incredibly informative. But at a certain point, it's kind of like, the analogy I would give is like the corporations that exist now. These monolithic, huge corporations that kind of have their own autonomy. So no individual person is like, I'm doing some fucked up shit working for this company, because they're isolated from the mechanisms that allow companies and corporations to do fucked up shit. That's kind of what the traditional news media feels like to me at this point. Obviously, with the internet, we have the choice of finding different things and seeking out our own information, but that relates to another thing you said, which is the bubble. And I had a conversation with Zach Leary about this on the show, about these filter bubbles, right? When you go on Facebook, when you go on social media, when you're on Google, you are basically getting presented information that they think you want to see, which includes the type of media you consume, which means after a certain period of time, you're not going to see anything from Breitbart. You're not going to see anything from right-wing conservative channels if you're a liberal, because they know you don't want to see that. You're not going to like that. You're not going to enjoy that. So you start whittling down. And I've noticed this also in the spiritual sector too, right? I had a weird, interesting thought the other day that I finally thought about the word new age, and I'm like, what the hell is that? It's like the weirdest term, and like whoever came up with it for the relevant time, I'm sure there was an intention behind it, but now it's just a label, right? It doesn't mean anything. But I see that those filter bubbles take place in everything from sports to spiritual, and I wonder what impact that's having on us as individuals and collectively, because we kind of move more towards what we're interested in, and maybe not even what we're interested in, what these companies think we're interested in, getting a call, what these companies think we're interested in, and, what does that do? How does that shape our collective reality? So I'd be interested to hear your kind of take on it.
Well, I could hardly articulate it better than you did, because I think you said it perfectly, that these large corporations, which break down into all kinds of expressive channels, and so-called communicative channels, they do create phenomena which are distorted and strange, because people become obsessed with... I saw an interview last night, actually, from a woman who was waiting to get into a Trump debate, and he just made the comment saying that, Jeb Bush should stop saying that his brother kept us safe. Right. And they asked her, well, what do you think about that? And she said, well, I don't think he should say that about... I'm a Republican. You shouldn't say that about George Bush. So then the interviewer said, well, does that make it... how does that impact on your feeling about Trump? Oh, not at all. Not at all. I love Trump. What he thinks, I think. And I saw this. I turned off the TV and went back to reading a book. But those kinds of numb, dumb axes are caused essentially by television and by the internet to some extent, but certainly for a generation above 40 by a mix, above 50 mainly by television, below 30 I'd say entirely by the internet. I have great respect for younger humans now who are just saying, I don't even own a television. It's not like I say to them, oh, come on, don't be so stiff, get yourself a TV and watch Homeland.
Right.
No,
right.
They're into better things.
Yeah.
And they're into a more sort of more communal, more people-oriented activities than just sitting there and imbibing this, what is basically, as you said before, corporate spew. A very good example is MSNBC, which I just talk about for a second. Danny Goldberg, one of our podcasters and my oldest friend in the world, he and I had a conversation about a year ago saying that as Comcast had bought MSNBC, how quickly would they get rid of the radicals? Right. Well, they've gone.
Yeah.
They put Al Sharpton. I'm not a huge fan of his, but, he does have opinions that represent a certain number of people, and he is quite courageous in what he says. They took him off a nightly show at 6 and gave him the African-American ghetto on Sunday morning, which has traditionally been where African-American broadcasters are put. And it's an awful thing, and he's there now. They took away all of the opinionators, as it were, during the day, and put in a bunch of Ken and Barbies who just say the news and do stuff about a lot of stuff about Halloween, a lot of stuff about supposedly good news, whereas some news that we might wish to hear, that might impact our lives, like the state of Social Security and all kinds of the state of the education system, has gone because people are bored by that. So they'll put stuff on that isn't boring, and therefore you learn nothing. So.
Well, which isn't, that's not dissimilar to a lot of people's web consumption at this point. I mean, we know we're partners in MindPod Network, and one of our mission statements there is to actually put out content that is meaningful, impactful, and, for lack of a better word, evergreen, that it's constantly useful for people so you can revisit it, and it actually should have a meaningful impact on your life. That's the whole point of it. Whereas a lot of the things on the web are specifically set up to be not that. They're supposed to be quick, attention-grabbing headlines, bites, things, entertainment that's transient and is gone. We'll see how that impacts younger generations and everything. But I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. And I don't want to get on the shit on mainstream culture tangent too much, because I think one of the things you mentioned, you said Homeland, right? I think one of the things that all of this interconnectivity with media has allowed us to do is really tell these cultural myths and stories in a way that is collectively shared. That's kind of unprecedented, right? I mean, before there was a limited number of channels you could get, only so many movies would come out. Yes, it was a shared experience by only a small number of things, but now, if you're into Game of Thrones, you understand the mythology behind that, like the Star Wars thing. They premiered it last night during the football game. I was looking on Twitter, people were like, I'm crying, and they're crying not because they probably don't know why, but it's because it taps in the symbolic references in Star Wars cut really deep. So when you see those things and it mixes with nostalgia, it evokes an emotional response. But I think the power of, that the ability we have to tell stories now and narratives that are collectively shared is potentially amplified, and also a broader spectrum, which I find really interesting. And, I don't think it's good or bad. I think we can look at news stations and say, well, this is kind of bad. I mean, I don't think that they're putting the intent that's behind that is not to make the world a better place. It's to pay the bills, to grow as a company, to increase revenue, which I think a lot of, listen, Bernie Sanders, right? He's running on this entire platform, basically. That's what's happening right now. Corporations have taken over. They're squeezing the middle class. All of the social injustices would be rectified if we had, middle class reform and, started taxing the wealthy, which I agree with all of those sentiments. Let's just go into there. After I went on that tangent, what do you think of Bernie Sanders? What do you think of Hillary Clinton? What do you think is going on?
Whoa. So Noah's not going to ask about Sharon Salzberg right yet.
No.
Okay. Well, no, I'm up for this, as you know. I think I've been watching Bernie Sanders for years, and interesting parallels are going on. Jeremy Corbyn was just elected the head of the Labour Party in England, and in Britain, and if people think that the Labour Party has been a socialist party ever, they have to read up, because it might have been in the late 30s, but since then it's been a party that's trying to get elected and therefore was centralized. So it was Clintonized by Tony Blair, who took the Labour Party and made of it a centrist party, which won for a while. And then he ended up supporting the war in Iraq, and everybody knew that he'd somehow lost his way. Right. My sister, who worked for the Labour Party, gave me a lot of insight into this. So Jeremy Corbyn makes Bernie Sanders, look like Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Jeremy Corbyn is a serious anti-war, nuclear disarmament socialist who makes very little money, lives in a small house, drives a small car like Pope Francis, so forth, and is a true egalitarian. I think that Bernie Sanders has the same kind of real feelings about the way income is distributed in the United States, and believes in the country because he believes in certain facets of the original concept of the country, disregarding slavery and the massacre of the Native American people. But I mean, he does see that Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, those guys, had a vision which was much more people-oriented than anything that had existed in Europe. And I think that's kind of ultimately where Bernie comes from. His socialism is just about equalization of income and the opportunity for young people to gain a college degree without having to, mortgage off their entire lives. I think Hillary Clinton, who I have met and spent almost 30 minutes talking with, one-to-one, very smart woman, quite a compassionate woman, not a hard case, not just an opportunist. When people say that, I don't think they know her. It's been said many times that one-to-one, she's very humane, very human, very likable, and looks you straight in the eye and listens to what you said, which is more than I can say for some of the people I know. So, I do not hate Hillary Clinton. I have arguments with people about it because they say, well, she's not the real thing. She just wants the power. And her husband was another centrist of the Tony Blair kind. But what is their alternative? So I think, I'm rationalizing a little bit because I think Hillary can beat pretty much anybody if she's on her game.
Rubio? Who's it going to be?
I think it's going to be Trump.
I just am buckling up if that happens.
Well, I mean, it's just a horrible thought, but I don't see, at this moment, I don't know how they're going to bring him down unless they find out that, that indeed he's been doing, bestiality or something really.
But Tony Blair did that, and it's no big deal. That doesn't mean bestiality is cool. That's like a little feather in your cap these days.
Okay, well, there you go. I think that I hope it isn't Trump. Even though Trump is a strange being because he's obviously a power seeker, something of a megalomaniac, definitely an egomaniac, something of a hypocrite. But he is bringing truths out that no one else, because he doesn't care.
He doesn't care.
So when he says, that you draw the line when he calls, he says you can't look at Kylie Fiorina's face, therefore don't elect her, which is insulting and disgusting. But he also he represents a sort of proto-fascist idea that all foreigners should be ejected from the country.
Xenophobic for sure. I mean,
horrible. But just to get back to Clinton for a second, I think that she is a smart woman, and I don't think that I'm not affected by the money she's earned or any of that. That's okay. I mean, if someone's willing to give you all that money to give a lecture, there's a reason for that, and they don't give it away and then depart the scene because they gave all their money away. They can afford to. The question is really with her whether she'll actually get anything done. I don't know, but I know this much, that when I watched the Democratic debate, there was a lot more issue-oriented conversation than there ever was.
Right, and that's what struck me, too.
I think Rubio is a possibility because he's young, he represents a different generation, he has a brain. I personally wouldn't vote for him in a millennium, but I think that compared with the other circus performers that are in that group, yes, because you think of the other people, Jeb, he may not be a bad guy. I don't want to make any judgments about Jeb, but he's obviously got intelligence. He's obviously, a real person, but he's burdened down with the past of his brother, and he's not gonna be the nominee. You can't be the nominee with 7% of the Republican vote. Anything can happen in the next 6 months, but it is 6 months. It's not a year.
Yeah, no, it's not a year anymore. It's primaries. It's almost November. So, no, it's I get it.
I don't know. I think that the Democrats have been a weak force in the last. Actually, as far back as I remember, I'm dissatisfied with their compromises and their lack of ability to get things done, and so I'm very disappointed in them. But it's all in the world we live in. No, it seems to me on that level that it's always the best of the worst.
Well, here's my question to you: why should we care? This is something I've thought about for the past 10, 15 years, ranging from very political minded, really interested in what was going on, to completely uninterested, could not care less. And now I've kind of centered on like, I'm actively involved because I realize these people are kind of going to be leading our country in one way or the other. But why should we care about all this stuff? What is it? And I mean that in the sense also of like when you're talking about the oneness, when we're talking about, does this really matter? Why should we care? That's the question.
Well, we're in this incarnation with 7 point whatever billion people on the planet. We see this great suffering. We can alleviate suffering sometimes, in ways that are diverse, but it happens. When Lyndon Johnson became president, despite his rap, which is not good about Vietnam and so forth, he did bring in the Great Society, which helped a lot of people. When Richard Nixon came in after him, he implemented much more strongly Medicare, Social Security, and bolstered up those things. These are nonpartisan things that I'm saying. They did things which helped old people, for instance. By old, I mean anybody who was collecting Social Security. They created a bit of a safety net so people wouldn't be in dire poverty in the richest country in the history of at least this cycle of the world. Right. They did those things. Nowadays, what's the problem is that nobody seems to get anything done. And, yesterday I saw they're going to bring in rules about drones, which means that you're not going to be walking down the street and be killed by a drone that was set off by someone who was drunk or vicious or just couldn't care less.
Not if you live here. If you live in Afghanistan or Pakistan or somewhere else.
You live here, exactly. Yeah. On the other level, I think that the reason someone like Bono has really pressured politicians in various countries is because he saw some real iniquities that could be resolved easily, like debt forgiveness. The idea that countries particularly in Africa and in the East and the Far East and the Near East owed money which the people they owed it to didn't really need, and at this point they could be forgiven and their economies could grow consequently. He did that because he believed he could influence politicians. Right. But it seems in this culture right now that it's a do-nothing type of deal, like in the 19th century, that just don't do anything to upset the corporate kings and robber barons who pay for, within Citizens United, pay for the super PACs who support the politicians who get in. And they're scared to death of alienating people. And it's very complex because with the Koch brothers, if you watch television a little bit, you'll see that they support some very good things. Lincoln Center would not be what it is without the Koch brothers in New York. They do support good things. So they're very clever. They will support things which enhance us while destroying our ability to be sort of equal citizens. So it's complex. I think that on the local level of gubernatorial and mayors and so forth, much more gets done than on the federal level, which is kind of indicative of the American political consciousness of the past 200, God knows how many years. The idea that a federal government could impose things upon a population that they don't want is sort of vitiated by the balance of local, non-federal decision-making, which is based upon, that the education system that works in New York City does not work in Shreveport. So so the system has got all kinds of complicated, I think rather brilliant things, but it's not a parliamentary democracy. So I myself, for instance, do not think that Wyoming should have the same number of senators as New York. I really don't. I think that should be stopped. They should have one senator. We should have 8. Because there's millions and millions and millions and millions of us, and there's 9 people in Montana, and they shouldn't have 2 senators. So there are things about the system. My brother-in-law is an expert on the growth of parliamentary democracy in the West, and I've read his work, and he has maintained, he's an American, by the way, he's maintained that the system in America of the Electoral College and the senatorial representation is part of the reason that there's a lot of iniquities in America, and I agree with him about that. So, but I haven't given up on politics because I see it as being karma yoga. Not the politicians, maybe, but for me personally, when I give up on it and don't pay attention, I feel like, oh my God, I have the ability to make words and sentences and to influence at least the people around me, and I try. Yeah. And that's a little bit of karma yoga. However, as you said at the beginning of this thing, the partisan nonsense that is presented to us by the corporate media every day has destroyed a certain aspect or facet of representative democracy.
Yeah.
And that is dangerous because the alternative is dictatorship or just chaos, you know. So,
Well,
yeah.
No, I mean, I think that's a good, it's something that I consistently deal with too. I mean, it also in an interesting way relates to the sports stuff you were mentioning. This is another question I had. I mean, because to me, I've realized one of my biggest sadhanas or spiritual practices has been being a sports fan. Like I mean that in a very real.
Being a Dolphins fan.
Yeah, I'm a Dolphins fan. I have had to learn the skill of equanimity. Like I don't mean that as a joke. Like I used to, if we go back 15 years, I'm freaking out at bars, screaming, just like I would be mortified seeing like a video of myself, which I'm sure exists. But now, like, you know, after a miserable loss, which are often, I actually can get over it really quickly. And just by being aware of the difference there is something. But like, I mean, there are values, because going back to what you were originally talking about with the sports thing, and this does relate to politics, because to me, politics, I don't mean to trivialize, because there's lots of very important issues at stake, but it's also a game, right? It is also a game that people are playing. They're involving their egos, they're involving, you know, compassion, they're involving all this stuff mixed and jumbled together. But the sports stuff, I will say, like, it teaches you to kind of put yourself out of yourself and see how you're relating to a situation. And that to me has been one of the more interesting aspects of it. And I know you're a huge Manchester United fan and you follow them as avidly as I follow the Dolphins, which I know, like, my soul has hurt after losses in a specific way. Like, and I don't mean like and then I'm mad at everyone the rest of the day. I'm acting like an asshole. I'm like, this is wrong and I can't stop it. But I do think it gives you insight into how we relate to things in life. You know, you can use it as a metaphor for any relationship you have to something. So I thought that was really interesting. You said that.
No, I think you're right. You know, my father we're from Manchester, so this isn't some sort of, you know, United are the, I think, maybe apart from Real Madrid, are the richest and most popular sports club in the world. And I'm not just jumping on this. You know, my whole family has been United fans since 1912. So we're dyed in the wool, you know. And what you just said is totally correct and wise. That my father used to get so depressed when United lost, and it would influence the whole family. Now, He wasn't abusive; he wouldn't hit anybody. No. But he was kind of dull for the rest of the day. You know, like they lost. Well, Manchester United lost 3-0 to Arsenal 2 weeks ago. They were just murdered. I watched it on television, and they were massacred by a team that United fans find the most obnoxious of all. And I must say that, you know, they were losing early in the game. They were losing horribly after 12 minutes of 90. So I gave up on it. By the time the 90 had finished, I'd accepted it and went about my business and sort of forgot it. So you're right. I learned not to let this thing, you know, influence anything else, because that truly is madness. Yeah. And we see it, you know, we see it in the ridiculous sort of behavior that sports fans get involved with, and you know, we laugh about it, you know, but then when it hits us and it's our team or our supporters who are hurt or whatever, you realize, oh, this is crazy, you know. So it's like anything else. I don't, you know, I mean, I love music, right? But I used to get very partisan about it, and say, oh God, you really like that band? How could you? They're awful. And why don't you listen to, you know, Little Feat, or why don't you listen to Talking Heads, you know, bands of great quality and so forth. Stop that, because I realize that, you know, it's all exquisitely designed in karmic terms, that you like something, you don't like something else. I personally went through a period when I loved Shakespeare, was crazy about Shakespeare, attended the Shakespeare Institute in England for 2 to 3 years, and was, you know, completely involved in that. And I guess I was a bit of a snooty person, because I certainly couldn't compare, you know, James Bond films with King Lear. I got over it, because I realized that, you know, some people it just doesn't speak to. And to be, you know, sort of snobby about these things, as well as being totally partisan about Manchester United or the Miami Dolphins or the New York Giants, is foolishness. But it gives you a moment of relief. Life is so replete with minor and major suffering that if you can overcome that to some extent by a relaxation form of entertainment, which of course didn't exist until fairly recently. Right. I mean, what were people doing in the 17th century for entertainment?
Cards, right? Cards.
You know,
things like that?
They're playing the harpsichord. They'd play cards. They'd drink. They'd look at each other. Whatever. But here we are for now almost a century now. Well, not quite, but sort of 3/4 of a century. We've been sort of bombarded by all kinds of entertainment, and it as we go back to the beginning of the podcast, it can be a distraction which can suddenly you wake up from it and realize that your life has been mainly watching a screen, and the only way I rationalized it was because I was making a lot of stuff that was on a screen.
Right.
But that doesn't excuse me. I mean, do I really need to watch Bill Maher? Do I really? I mean, it makes me laugh, and there's some truth in there and so forth. But if I don't watch it, nothing is lost.
Yeah.
Nothing is lost.
So what you're saying, though, is something that I experience a lot in my life. I go through these oscillations of kind of really, really like hyper productivity, where I'm getting a lot of things done. I may be meditating, I may be exercising, I may be, creating things. And then I'll have a period, and seemingly brought on by nothing, where I'm just like, if you asked me to do like 2 different things, I'd be like, nah, I can't do it. Like, it's too much. I need to just zone out. I need to refresh, whatever you want to call it. And I wonder how much of that is our built-in kind of karmic tendencies, or if you want to take the modern scientific view, neural pathways that we're emphasizing over a course of a lifetime or any period of time. And I wonder how that really, what the relationship is there, because I see it change in myself often. Like it truthfully does. And I try to foster the qualities that I think make me a happier person and a better person to be around and, more fulfilled. But it's not like it's a switch always, it's not like something I can just turn on and turn off. As an analogy for something I was able to do like that, like when I stopped smoking cigarettes, I was done. Like it wasn't like, I'm going to start smoking cigarettes again. Maybe I won't. Like, people have a hard time quitting. And I know, and not to minimize how difficult that can be, but like when I was done, I was done. Like that was it. But I can't do that for all of my negative behaviors or habits. So I wonder, so what I've started to do is look at it like this. Is not look at things as though they're negative patterns or behaviors. But again, this is a Sharon Salzberg thing, right? Looking at it as an opportunity to look with fresh eyes, to begin again, to see the patterns that you're doing. And over time, if you notice enough things, you have the ability to consciously change that or reassess those patterns. So it's a little less harsh rather than being like, I didn't exercise today, or I ate this today and I shouldn't have, I'm a big dumb idiot. Being like, oh, well, you know what? Next time when that happens, I can note it again. And then when it happens 10 more times, I can be like, all right, guy, you gotta actually pay attention here. So yeah, I don't know how I got on that tangent, but it's something I've just noticed in the oscillations of really being like hyper involved and feeling productive in whatever aspect of life, next to just kind of relaxing a little bit. Not to say one is better than the other, but just noticing those oscillations kind of naturally occur, for lack of a better term.
Well, relaxing is an individual thing, and we all do it differently. And the problem maybe is that, in the American paradigm, entertainment and so forth has become a sort of life, almost a spine of daily life. In Europe, it was the royal thing, the king and queen and the nobility, where you're sort of like demigods, and then that went away, thank goodness, at least in most places. But here, that isn't the past. So now it's sort of rich people. So now you've got vastly rich people running for president, and then you've got people who've made fortunes in the entertainment area who are clearly have nothing to contribute to us except their hairstyle or their latest plastic surgery, or some other obviously worthless thing for us to be thinking about. It's infused all over the world, because you go to other countries and you'll see that, oh God, I've never missed the Big Bang Theory. It did a wonderful show.
I like the Big Bang Theory.
Well, no, I'm not making a comment, but it's just you're in Calcutta or something, and someone's saying it's happening all over the world. My feeling about this is that it's a personal choice, and that I know that people that devote themselves to a monastery or are monks or roshis or whatever, a good number of those people are sincere and really do not want to waste time with, with anything, even with, they may like to, check out a Bruce Springsteen record or something, but basically they're not watching sitcoms. They're not wasting time. And that's totally wonderful, because they are our teachers in a way. Yeah. But for most of us, I think, to be honest, I get kind of bored when, for the sake of it, let's call it spiritual people, when all they want to talk about to me or think that we can actually exchange ideas about are things that are so, sort of, we don't know the answers, but we know the words, and the words keep coming out. And if I'm constantly being communicated to on that level, I get bored. I'm sorry. I just get bored. The words begin to lose their, what they used to call valency, but certainly they lose their power to inspire and to transform. A lot of what is transformational, it comes from silence. A lot of it comes from study. A lot of it comes from interaction. Our ability to be happy, which is the ultimate, it's kind of like, that's it. We want to be happy and kind and thoughtful, compassionate. Our ability to have, it varies with everyone. I mean, we all, we know people who like what we like, and that's certainly in a pop cultural world. That's kind of where it's at. So people who really do like Miley Cyrus really like Miley Cyrus.
I really like Miley Cyrus.
Well,
I'm 2 for 2 here. Big Bang and Miley Cyrus.
Yeah. I think she's extremely talented and wakes people up a little bit. She sort of says, "Well, is nudity like evil? Is
she's
weed
a little
evil?"
Overt, but I like her. I think she's talented too, and there's just worse things to promote than nudity and weed. So I mean, I don't.
But
do a lot worse.
She's in a tradition of artists. She's an artist, and from Salvador Dali and Marcel Duchamp through to Jack Kerouac and John Lennon and Miley Cyrus and so forth. And also in other forms, filmmakers like Godard and even major filmmakers like Scorsese, constantly can wake us up. They can wake us up into realities and into realizations that we didn't know through the pop medium. And, people are amazing when they dichotomize, like they say, well, the Beatles weren't Beethoven. Well, no, they weren't. But,
what does
Beethoven,
that even mean, though?
Beethoven wasn't Beethoven.
Right.
When Beethoven was playing, he was sort of dying to get patrons, and Mozart too, and Schubert and all of them.
Yeah.
They'd do anything to get a patron because they were starving, and they needed, the Count of Monte Cristo, whatever, some aristocrat to say, "Oh, you can play at the court, and I'll give you some shekels." And it was a sort of a commercial thing. There's no difference. Pop becomes classic when it's it's sort of like interesting because people can get weird about Miley Cyrus, but they're very, very respectful of Joni Mitchell. But I guarantee you that Joni Mitchell in 1968, 69, 70, whatever, was also trying to have hit records so she could pay the rent. So we're all human beings here. I do get bored with constant so-called spiritual conversations when I know that the real, and this is something I've learned from the Sharon Salzbergs and Joseph Goldsteins and Ram Dasses, and even from our friends, our close friends, that it is important to see that there are other people around. And, sometimes I'm in an elevator in Manhattan and somebody's wearing a Rangers shirt, and I can have a little talk with them about how terrible the Rangers are, how great they are, whatever. And I'm not really that concerned about the Rangers. But that little interaction with me and that guy or that woman can create a moment when there is indeed some communication which might just brighten her or my day. Right. And that is so important.
I agree.
So if you're a Buddhist walking around and all you care about is, I was at the Apple Store over the weekend in Grand Central and was amazed to see a whole bunch of Saffron Road Buddhist monks.
They're not the scammers, right? They're not the people going around the city.
I don't.
They could be. Give us some money. Give us an iPad.
No, they look very authentic to me. I don't know, something in their eyes, and I don't know. I didn't talk to them. They didn't ask for money. They were looking at iPads.
Yeah.
And I smiled to myself because I thought, I wonder if when they get their iPad, are they just going to be looking at the poems of Milarepa, or are they going to be checking the scores in the Premier League in England? I don't know, but it's beautiful. It's a beautiful canvas.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful canvas. It's been marred by divisiveness and a total sort of movement away from, kind of. Well, let's put it this way: organized religion has its place. But it's place of total domination, of telling Catholics you can't do this, you can't do that, right. Of telling Hasidic people you can't do this, you can't do that. We're not in that world anymore. Some are, but most of us make our own decisions. That's a double-edged sword because it means that situational vision can be quite selfish, whereas the original, sort of Christian and Buddhist and so forth is about understanding that you live in a nexus of humanity. And therefore, it's very important to connect with that humanity. The word bubble, you go back to that word bubble, is very big with me right now because I'm just tired of it. We all live in some kind of bubble, but I'm tired of this, kind of, I'm not interested in anything except this.
Right.
Well, if you're in a monastery, great. But if you're not, how are you going to communicate with people who do not know about Ramakrishna? Do you just not want to?
Right.
You just want to sort of let them die on the lamb,
And you touched on Ramakrishna, who is one of my favorite mystics, saints of all time. He's much like the Neem Karoli Baba Maharaji, all one thing. All of the paths up the mountain lead to the same place. There's a ton of them. It's all the same thing in one different permutation. And that's kind of how I look at what we're talking about with like the cultural paradigm here, is the more experiences and understanding you have about different aspects of life, culture, music, arts, entertainment, politics, the more able you are to relate and have some type of understanding and hopefully some compassion for differing points of view. It doesn't, like, by reading something that's right wing, I don't become right wing, but but at least I know that's where they're coming from, and maybe there's some truth there, or maybe there's some. I've learned this with music too. Listen, I'm not going to pretend that it's for everything. There's still plenty of music out there that I think is crap, like, for lack of a better word. I think it's soulless crap. And maybe it is, maybe it isn't, who knows? But my point is that there's a lot of stuff out there that we can look at and essentially determine our relationship to. And the more you experience, this is like a hallucinogenic epiphany I've had, and I'm sure a lot of people have. If you know about everything, if you had all of the knowledge in the world, you could talk to anyone about anything. And you notice this in life. You know what you're describing with the Rangers jersey. I've had that plenty of times. Because I'm a Dolphins fan, when I see other Dolphins fans out in public, we can have a quick little conversation about something and relate on a human level. Maybe it's about sports. Maybe that's something people think is silly, but there is a connection that's forged there. So I think, the theme of this podcast, what I'm realizing now, is kind of the interplay between spirituality, which was the opening question here, and culture, and how do we weave those things together. And I'm much like you, very reticent to go full bore 100% spiritual all of the time, right? Everything can be spiritual in one sense, right? You can mow your grass and that can be spiritual, but you don't have to talk about the 6 paramitas every single day with every single person you meet. You can weave that in. And what I'm interested in seeing happen here is kind of normalizing, for lack of a better word, some of these concepts and really deep things, but also having them be loose enough and light enough that we can use them in our everyday life too. That's what it is. So if you're I don't know if the Donald Trump people are going to do it, but if you like Donald Trump and you want to believe in some Vedic philosophy, more power to you. You'll have an interesting perspective that no one else has. And that can at least create a platform for some engagement. Maybe Donald Trump is, because I agree. Listen, for the crazy thing about Donald Trump, for all of this stuff that we're talking about, a lot of the things he's saying are refreshing even to me, right? I know he's an idiot. I know what he's saying is probably, hopefully well orchestrated by himself. He might just be a dolt, who knows? But like, when you see someone up there just not giving a fuck, for lack of a better word, that's somewhat refreshing when all we've been given is people who are constantly giving out canned responses. We know they're beholden to lobbyists. So it all boils back down to me that I think everyone, and this sounds kind of hippie-ish and new agey, but everyone has a unique perspective based on their experiences. And the more experiences we're open to and attempt to understand, the easier our relationships with other people will be. I guess that's kind of the summation of what we've been talking about in a lot of ways. Yeah,
and everything you just said was very penetrating. I recently had I've been having a correspondence with someone who makes propaganda films for the pro-life people. He isn't just anti-choice. He's actually making the films that are sent to whatever. Right. And I've known him for about 20 years, and he's a guy that's impossible to dislike. He's just very, very, very affable, very funny, very smart. And it's interesting that my quick sort of reflexive response is to say, I don't want to even know you because you're doing things that are, that most women that I know at any rate would find repulsive.
Right.
But he has a perspective and he believes in it. And I don't even want to say to him, you believe in it, but you're a fool, because who am I to say that? Now, it changes if, you see someone like, I see someone like Silvio Berlusconi or dictators who are also thieves and crooks and liars.
Yeah, it's not a passive thing. I don't mean this to be like open to everyone. If they're like, listen, if Hitler's on your doorstep and someone's committing the horrible atrocities, there is some strength that needs to be cultivated to be like, this is wrong. That's
wrong, and to stop it. Yeah, and everybody would agree with that, including, I think, His Holiness Dalai Lama. But I think that everybody has to be aware that within if something is called a democracy, well, then debate is necessary, and you can't have people like suddenly pulling out a gun and shooting each other when they don't agree with each other, which might have been the case, a couple hundred years ago. But we've come a long way in a way, because at least now people don't, actually engage themselves in physical horror shows, at least, on the political level. What they do is they lie, and they don't want to alienate people who pay for them. And that's just awful, and we know that. But, I can't say that I'm down the line completely left-wing when the other people have got ideas about how to improve an economy that are not necessarily anything like what I believe in. And I'm not an expert. So for me to sort of start saying, well, there's only one way to do this, and that's this.
Right, which is what we're talking about, too, with like the elitism in music and all that. All right, I want to bookend this with I want you to give a tip for quote-unquote normal people who are on the spiritual path. One tip that you have found to be particularly helpful. I'm sure you have a lot, but one.
Well, Ram Dass has been very influential upon me because of his brilliance. Not, I don't regard him as a guru, and he doesn't want to be regarded as. And the tip that he gave me, not one-to-one, but sort of over the years, is that all paths lead to one, and that just because someone goes to church and lights a candle and prays to the Mother Mary and does ritual things that we might find nonsensical and meaningless does not mean that they are any less close to the one than you are. It's almost like saying, well, if I'm a Catholic and I see someone praying to a monkey, I'm going to say, that's ridiculous. Why are you praying to Hanuman? Who is that? What is it about? And then, people can talk about it and say, well, he's sort of archetypal symbol of service and of love and of devotion and loyalty. But then that person could then say, well, yeah, but what about Jesus? He was actually a human being, not a monkey. What's the matter with you? So I would say that whatever gets you through the night, if it really does, is crucially important for you to maintain. And obviously, I'm not talking about, well, let's dress up in uniforms and have swastikas, and I believe in that. It gives me a real hit to do that. No, within the realm of humanitarianism, kindness, and exploration of consciousness, you have to be tolerant. And that within that tolerance, which is it's easier said than done, because you can walk around Crown Heights and see a bunch of Hasidim and Lubavitcher Jewish people with fur hats and long dark coats in the middle of 95 degrees July weather and think these people are lunatics. It's kind of like a reflex. But they could turn around and go, okay, well, who was Rama and Sita, and why do you go Ram?
Right.
Who are those people? Do you know they existed?
Right.
This argument can be immediately made nuclear as soon as the word tolerance is taken out of the picture. So I would say the tip I would give to people is be tolerant of something which you at first find antithetical to the way you are doing it. Even if somebody says, I can't meditate. I just don't want to meditate. Well, don't just go, you should meditate because maybe they don't need to meditate.
Right. Or maybe they're not ready, or maybe it's not going to mean the same thing. No, I think that's great. All right. Well, David, thank you Thank you for doing this. Yeah, we're definitely going to do it again.
I love this. I've always loved talking to you. It's just true. You know what it is? No, before we leave, I just want to say it's what the Rastafarians call reasoning. And it's got nothing to do with reason or rationalize. It's what it's about is reasoning means the glue that holds two people or more together while they talk. That's truly a glue that makes you happier and makes you closer to that person and closer to truth. And it can go on as long as you like, and it is reasoning. And it may go to the mystical, it may go to the downright, it may be the eagles and the giants, but it is two people exchanging a form of communication which is an actual metaphor for love.
I love it, man. I love it. I'm right with you. All right. Well, we'll talk soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Noah. Great.
Well, if you've listened this far, I'm assuming you must really enjoy this. So I'm going to remind you again, leave a review on iTunes. I think there's I have 3 or 4 more weeks. This is early on. If you're going back and listening to this, when this podcast, this is what you get when you listen to the end. You get podcast. When this podcast is wildly popular and everyone is talking about it, and you're going back and you're hearing this now, again, I had a message to the Johnny and Sally Come Latelys, which my mom was not happy about. I used the bad word. But if you've listened this far, rate and review it now, because I have a few more weeks early on, I think, to get in new and noteworthy. And my numbers are pretty good. Not going to tell you what my numbers are, but if you want, you can email me at nlampert@mindpodnetwork.com, and I'll tell you exactly what my monthly statistics are. So there's no doubt. But yeah, rate and review it. That's all I want. Next week, my guest is Vic Berger. If you don't know Vic, get ready. Gonna be sweet. All right. Have a good one. Bye-bye.